May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Amen. Please be seated. So 13 years ago, I visited the Holy Land with a group of Messianic Jews, which are Jews who believe in Jesus. As a Christian with Jewish background from my father's side, I hope that my visit would help me integrate the Judaism that I felt whispering in my blood with my belief in the messianic identity of Yeshua HaNotzri, which is what Messianic Jews call Jesus of Nazareth, Yeshua HaNotzri. I also hope to be inspired by visiting what felt to me like Narnia, a land that I had previously only encountered in books and could only visit in my imagination, an almost magical land where many of my favorite stories had taken place. When I arrived, I tried to soak up the holiness of the land by touching the sandy texture of its ancient walls and basking under the same sun that stood still in the sky for Joshua. I was expecting the Holy Land to work on my soul in ways that no other place could. And the place where I felt my soul being worked on most profoundly was the western wall of the ancient temple in the old city of Jerusalem. Another name for this wall, which once stood closest to the Holy of Holies in the Jewish temple, is the Wailing Wall, which is appropriately named since many Jews do not pray passively or softly in its presence. Many wail at it, many punch at it, scream at it, and release all their inner turmoil upon it. And the wall just stands there, receiving all of it with a rock-steady equanimity, and yet also seeming to respond by pouring out blessings through its cracks. I remember feeling at the time like this was a relatively inappropriate or even slightly blasphemous way to pray. I specifically remember an older Jewish man who appeared to be homeless wail against the wall with violent desperation, moaning and striking his clenched fists against it. I kept my distance from him as I approached the wall with a piece of paper upon which I had proudly written a short prayer in Hebrew. And I slid my paper into one of the wall's many prayer-packed crevices. And then I felt a tap on my shoulder. And upon turning around, I saw the man whom I had recently seen wailing against the wall. He looked into my face and asked me my name. I was initially startled by what felt like an intrusion into my own personal prayer space. But I told him, "My name is Daniel." And he responded, "Ben?" "No," I said, "my name is Daniel." Again, he asked, "Ben?" And at this point, I was growing confused and concerned. Having already felt uneasy about his eccentric prayer style, I did not want to upset this man who seemed to have difficulty with his hearing. So I decided to enunciate more loudly and clearly one more time. "No, my name is not Ben. My name is Daniel." But still, he asked, "Ben?" Worried that he might start directing his fists of rage at me if I corrected him again, I decided to start slowly walking away. But right before leaving, I realized what he was actually asking me. He was asking for my father's name. Ben means son or son of, like Ben-Hur. So I finally answered his question and told him my father's name, Bob. He then smiled and exclaimed, "Daniel Ben Bob, Shem Tov," which means good name. And then he gently placed his hands on my head and prayed a beautiful blessing over me. So for those of you who are wondering what to call me, you can call me Daniel or Father Daniel or the Reverend Dr. Daniel or even Daniel Ben Bob. Rabbi Daniel Ben Bob has a nice ring to it. My encounter with this man at the Western Wall has proven to be a significant milestone in my spiritual journey. First of all, the encounter led me to appreciate a particularly Jewish style of prayer that I initially dismissed as blasphemous. I began to realize that I had likely prejudged the man's eccentric prayer style just as I had misinterpreted his question. What I initially interpreted as an indication of his confusion was, in fact, his sincere curiosity and generous desire to bless me. And the man clearly seemed to be struggling with a great deal of suffering and turmoil in his prayers, but he was apparently able to release it to God at the Western Wall. His prayer seemed to comfort and encourage him enough to reach out in love and blessing to me, a random stranger who was judging him from a distance. It is this style of prayer that I referred to last week as feisty prayer or audacious prayer. And the Jewish people refer to it as chutzpah kalape shemaya, boldness against heaven, chutzpah kalape shemaya. And I actually ended up publishing an article in a Harvard journal about this style of prayer, if anyone is interested, some unashamed or maybe ashamed self-promotion. I obviously love to talk about this style of prayer. But secondly, and perhaps more importantly, the encounter has led me to practice withholding judgment, especially when it comes to other people's prayer life, and to appreciate the wide variety of ways to pray. There are many wonderful ways to engage with the divine that are valid and transformative, and that rouse joy among the angels in heaven, according to the Gospel of Luke. However, not all ways of praying are entirely valid. According to Jesus' parable this morning, prayer that makes one feel close to God at the expense of putting another person down is not a valid way to pray. Prayer that puffs up by passing judgment and condemnation against someone else is ultimately ineffective prayer. In this morning's gospel, I hear an invitation to withhold judgment when it comes to other people's prayer lives and to appreciate the Spirit's outpouring in a wonderfully wide variety of ways to pray. This week, I had the privilege to experience a variety of ways to pray that are offered regularly by this beautiful faith community. In each of these experiences, I felt the Spirit's outpouring, as the prophet Joel described in our reading this morning. Last Sunday, after an evening Eucharist and a Bible study with our youth group, I ventured out onto the Glenwood Prayer Labyrinth under the full moon, which was mostly hiding behind some heavy, wet clouds. With umbrella in hand and Carol Ann's headlamp securely fastened, I prayed with my body, stepping mindfully around and sometimes into puddles of delicious, crunchy wetness. And by the time I reached the center of the labyrinth, the rain had subsided, so that all I heard was the gentle dripping of raindrops from tree branches, the soothing background music provided by Paula, and the sound of my own breathing. And soon after I stepped out of the labyrinth, the magnificent full moon, known as the hunter's moon, dramatically parted the clouds that covered it in order to beam its beauty upon us, leaving us wonderstruck. It was very dramatic. On Monday night, the back of the church transformed into a zendo, where a few of us and some neighbors in the community created a sangha, a sacred community of meditation. We formed a mandala of bodies around some glass votive candles and sat in meditative silence for 15 minutes. We then continued our meditation by walking up and down and around the nave, meandering outside or circumambulating the prayer labyrinth. And after concluding with another 15 minutes of silence, I felt we had each contributed to the prayerful energy and holiness of this space. Just as Moses took off his shoes on the holy ground before the burning bush, we also walked shoeless on what we felt to be and helped to make holy ground right here. I can still feel that holiness here. And we're contributing to it now. And on Tuesday night, the Bishops' Committee gathered for a productive and prayerful meeting and some scrumptious snacks provided by Cindy. And we concluded our meeting, which is open to all, with a brief extemporaneous prayer in which I felt the Spirit reminding me of why we are all here in the first place, which is to serve God and to provide opportunities for people to pray and to experience God in a variety of life-giving ways. So I invite you to ask yourself, in what ways do I pray? Do I pray through Zen-inspired meditation, through earthy, embodied prayer on the labyrinth, through feeding the hungry, serving the poor, through singing, sitting, walking, running, gardening, dancing, through gathering on Sunday morning as Christians have been doing for centuries, and eating the bread and wine made holy? Perhaps all of the above. We are Episcopalians, which means we are people who pray. We are known by our Book of Common Prayer, which is jam-packed with a vast variety of wonderful prayers, and other denominations envy us because of this amazing resource. And there are indeed some important boundaries to observe as Christians and as Episcopalians, but this morning's gospel reminds us of perhaps the most important rule, which is that prayer is not to be a tool used to judge or condemn or hold others in contempt or put others down. Prayer in all of its many manifestations is a communal and transformative experience of the life-giving God. And I'd like to conclude this homily by inviting us to practice one of the most tried and true ways to pray, which is deeply Anglican and Benedictine and has its roots in ancient Israel. And it is chanting the psalm. In its wisdom, the lectionary provides a psalm for us to prayerfully sing each Sunday. So I invite us to chant this Sunday's psalm together using a very simple tone. So it's Psalm 65 in your bulletin insert. So it's a simple tone. I learned from Christopher Martin, who learned it from Cynthia Bourgeot. It just goes like this. Da 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 da, da 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 da. Okay, so the first line will be like this. You are to be praised, O God, in Zion. To you shall vows be performed in Jerusalem. You guys want to practice that first line? You are to be praised, O God, in Zion. To you shall vows be performed in Jerusalem. Good. All right, you guys got it. All right, let's do it. And we'll chant it prayerfully. You are to be praised, O God, in Zion. To you shall vows be performed in Jerusalem. To you that hear prayer shall all flesh come, because of their transgressions. Our sins are stronger than we are, but you will blot them out. Happy are they whom you choose and draw to your courts to dwell there. They will be satisfied by the beauty of your house, by the holiness of your temple. Awesome things will you show us in your righteousness, O God of our salvation. O hope of all the ends of the earth and of the seas that are far away. You make fast the mountains by your power. They are girded about with might. You still the roaring of the seas, the roaring of their waves, and the clamor of the peoples. Those who dwell at the ends of the earth will tremble at your marvelous signs. You make the dawn and the dust to sing for joy. You visit the earth and water it abundantly. You make it very plenteous. The river of God is full of water. You prepare the grain, for so you provide for the earth. You drench the furrows and smooth out the ridges. With heavy rain you soften the ground and bless its increase. You crown the year with your goodness, and your paths overflow with plenty. May the fields of the wilderness be rich for grazing, and the hills be clothed with joy. May the meadows cover themselves with flocks, and the valleys cloak themselves with grain. Let them shout for joy and sing. Amen.